So I guess it is 4 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started with welcome to the Mobiles in Developing Countries panel, and thank you for being here at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. So I'm Larissa Fast, and I am a AAAS fellow at USAID in the Global Lab as part of the digital development team. So I'll be moderating and chairing the panel. We have 4 great panelists. I will briefly introduce them and have some short opening remarks to kind of set the stage for our discussion this afternoon. So Patricia Kabra at the end is a public diplomacy fellow at Georgetown University. She's got a lot of experience as a senior foreign service officer. She's worked in the Middle East and also here in Washington, D.C. at the Department of State. She's been posted overseas as a public diplomacy officer in Jerusalem, Doha, Tunis, and Cairo. Here in Washington, she served as Deputy Director for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau. She is, prior to joining the public diplomacy for the 2014-15 academic year, she was at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, where she served as Public Affairs Counselor. Nick Martin, right here, is an educator, technologist, and social entrepreneur. He's also founder and president of TechChange, a DC-based organization that has developed a unique, scalable, and interactive model for technology training and social change. To date, TechChange has prepared over 4,000 alumni from 100 countries to apply technology effectively and appropriately in response to global challenges. He's worked with a number, and TechChange has worked with a number of organizations, including the World Bank, USAID, the State Department, and the UN Foundation. Then we have Sean McDonald, immediately to my right. He is CEO of FrontlineSMS, which was named the #1 technology NGO in non-governmental organization in 2013 journal, and it is one of the world's most popular professional messaging tools. Sean also founded Capture the Ocean and FrontlineSMS legal projects. He leads product development, strategic vision, and business development for FrontlineSMS. He's worked in and written about the connections between international development, data, technology, political communication, conflict resolution, and legal services. Will Sullivan, our the third over for me, is Director of Mobile for the Broadcasting Board of Governors. He leads strategy, design, and development for mobile news and language training products in languages for a weekly total audience of 206 million in 100 countries. He was previously Director of Mobile News for Lee Enterprises, which is a Reynolds Journalism Institute Fellow at the University of Missouri, Interactive Director of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and a board member and secretary for the Online News Association Board of Directors. And he has won numerous awards, including being selected as one of the 25 under 35 innovative young media leaders. So we have a very distinguished panel today, and I'm pleased to be a part of this. So just a couple of questions, I guess, and statistics to get us started. The panel, as you know, focuses on kind of 2 issues. Where mobile technology is headed in developing or southern countries, and how to take advantage of these new developments and to address some key challenges. So one of those key challenges is that there's almost as many mobile phones as people. I checked the GSMA statistics earlier today, and there was 7.2 billion mobile phones, registered mobile phones. Be somewhat misleading. They highlight the extent of, or the sheer numbers of mobile phones, and suggest that connectivity phones are universal. But we also know that about 1.8 people, about 1/4 of the world's population, don't have a bank account, but they do have a mobile phone. We also know that more than half of the global population still cannot access the internet, and that women are 21% less likely than men to own a mobile phone. So clearly there are some issues besides connectivity and the numbers of mobile phones at work here. So in our work at USAID on digital inclusion, we emphasize some of these broader implications and the meaning of the word inclusion. So inclusion, digital inclusion specifically, is not just about connectivity, but also in some of the policies and practices, the institutions that enable fully participate in a digital economy. But we also focus on users and content. What happens to the person who has access to technology but isn't using it? Why aren't they using it? Is it because services aren't offered in a language they can understand? Or is it because they don't know how to use the phones? Literacy becomes important. User content or user relevant content becomes important in this case. So these are some of the challenges that we can't just look at connectivity. We have to look at users and content that enable full participation, but also then the policies and institutions that support full participation in a digital economy. So with a brief intro to set the stage, I will turn it over to our panelists. We'll just kind of go down the line, and they each have about 5 minutes to talk about some of these directions that mobile technology is headed in the Global South, and also how to take advantage of it or address some of the issues. So, Sean.
That seems like a pretty... If I'll solve that one, I'm sure by the end of the 5 minutes. So FrontlineSMS is a platform that makes it easier to structure and automate communications. We started as a desktop platform because actually to date there are still more desktop computers than there are tablets. There are still more desktop computers than most forms of mobile devices. It's not a trend. I'm not like pro desktop. It's important to remember that when we talk about the way that technology is going, whether it's sort of in the future or now, that one of the most important technologies that we have are distribution networks, and those are dependent on infrastructure, and those are dependent on active markets. And there are a lot of ways, there are a lot of platforms that really struggle because the cost benefit of selling into those markets is really difficult. So Frontline started as this platform that came from the nonprofit space and has spent most of its life there, largely because the business model for selling into very low revenue, very low connectivity markets can be a real challenge. Starting with that challenge, though, is also, for us, one of the most accessible, right? Because when you start by solving some of the hardest problem, they get progressively easier in reverse. And so what we found is what started as this sort of unstructured community organizing platform very quickly became a business process engineering platform. And when I say business process, what I mean is if you're a community organizer who's trying to get people to participate in your river, your business at that point is organizing your community around you. And we've seen that done a group in Indonesia that actually set the world record for participation in a river cleanup. Wedding organizing, believe it or not, we've had people organize their weddings using Frontline. We've seen student council elections. We've seen national elections all be monitored using, or all be engaged with using SMS and using Frontline. The thing about working in environments is also that you have lower margins on almost all of the things that you would apply. And so one of our very favorite quotes actually comes from well, there's some debate about whether or not it's Mark Twain or William of Ockham, but it is, "I'm sorry that this letter was so long, I did not have time to make it shorter." And in text messaging, that is actually the name of the game. It's 160 characters. That's your limit. So you have to make it short. And more importantly, it costs something, so it has to be worth something, not only to you, but to whoever it is that you want to respond and to participate. what you find when you start mapping and building interactions that give value both back to your end user and to the organization is you start to really hone in on the interactions and the communications that are most valuable. And it brings a clarity and an honesty doing business into what your objectives are and the things that you're trying to accomplish. I know that this sounds maybe conceptual or abstract, but it is just this constant refining process. And you'll forgive me, my background is in journalism and law school, so I'm very used to getting told how bad my writing is and seeing lots of red lines to make it shorter. So it's something that is kind of a natural fit now, and what we find is when you build the interactions from the bottom up, right? We hear about data, and at Frontline we focus a lot on lean data. And you think about how it is that you information systems and also talk about bottom up. If you start with those interactions inherently valuable at the time that they are created, and then you build up and from them, and then begin to sort of associate them in the ways that make sense to larger realities, to larger infrastructures, to larger systems, you actually start building very clean, very efficient systems of communication, and it saves you from having to do all of the big data like collection and then algorithmic analysis, which is more correlation, and then narrow it back in. And it's something that bears the economic test of scale, which is another problem that many people in the international development space will say. In the interest of simplicity and your time, I'll stop here, but just to say that what started for us as an adventure in technology and trying to meet a basic connectivity problem has become something where we work together to get common language and cleaner, clearer, more valuable interactions. And that's a lot of what the heart and actually the business of Frontline's become. And it's been something that we've been really excited to work with a number of organizations like the State Department to roll out and make better over time. That's probably as far as I'm going to get.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. My PowerPoint in the back, and I think very fitting to follow Sean here. We do a lot of work with Frontline. We're at TechChange big fans of the work that he's doing. Okay, so at TechChange, we are in the business of building beautiful online courses for people and organizations who want to make a positive difference in the world. We teach our own certificate courses, topics like technology for emergency management or technology for monitoring and evaluation. And we also have a specific category of courses which focus exclusively on the mobile device, things like mobile phones for international development, or even more specifically, mobile phones for public health. And as Larissa mentioned, over the past few years, we have had over 4,000 alums taking these courses from over 100 countries and representing 1,300 organizations. We also build courses for other organizations, and include the United Nations Foundation, the World Bank, USAID, State Department. Those groups, let's see here. We have all kinds of a specific approach to online learning, which we're very excited about, which has been featured by a number of groups as well. We have a team of world-class nerds. Here's a fun animation of our team here. That's me in the middle. And some more folks from our team here, pics from the field, pics from the office. At the heart of our model is the notion of social collaboration, community involvement, community building. And I think this is really key. These are a few data visualizations from our course platform. We really focus on trying to track the social fabric of a learning community, and our model for learning really depends on that two-way communication. So we think in terms of critical thinking skills. That means it makes it harder for us to think about SMS as a delivery method. It also means that we're more smartphone focused because we're looking at the right depth of interaction. Just to give you a quick example, this is a course we did actually with Larissa's shop on M-Access. And we looked at things like, we had about 150 USAID staff and implementers take the course from over 40 countries, and we explored topics like, what does access and inclusion really mean? What about affordability? What about usability, digital literacy, local content? A lot of the things that, Larissa, you mentioned in your talk. So we also provide courses directly to the end user. This is my colleague Catherine in Uganda, and she is helping to develop a training, a series of online learning courses for pharmacists in Uganda to use rapid diagnostic tests to treat and prevent malaria. So in this model, interestingly enough, we went there, we did a needs assessment, we tried to understand the that's involved, and we found that mobile phones actually weren't the best way to deliver that content. In fact, it was more suited for a computer lab meets face-to-face training environment. So we definitely are seeing in our courses more and more users taking courses over mobile devices, but we're still not at a tipping point yet, and I'm happy to talk more about that. So I think one thought I'll leave you with is access is really not enough. We've heard a lot today about how access, mobile phones are now 90% of the world, people have access, many people own mobile phones. We don't think that's enough. When we think about education, it can't just be about access. It really has to be about quality and proper support. There's a lot of research to suggest that the people who are most marginalized and most vulnerable actually need support in an online learning environment. And when we think about the context of massive open online courses and other educational delivery models, it makes us very nervous to think about all the people who need that education the most actually not getting it in the ways that they need it. So at the end of the day, we believe that a lot of online learning self-selects for the most self-directed learners, and that makes us very nervous. It's something we think a lot about at TechChange to be focused on that problem. Finally, I think this is a fun shot from our office. We have a stack of mobile phones here, iPhone 3Gs, and just like phones, we are constantly evolving to keep up with the latest technologies, and our platform is built mobile first, so we're excited to continue to build ways for people to engage with our courses over mobile devices. We're expecting it, and I think that will, but no doubt there's a lot more that needs to happen in order to get to that point in terms of infrastructure. So I think I'll stop there, but looking forward to continuing the conversation with you all in the audience.
I got some bad news. The nets are down 1. Yeah. So, jump to the next slide deck. Thank you all for joining. I know it's Friday at 4:18 or so. I am from the Broadcasting Board of Governors. And
You could just do
there's
mine
a deck.
again. If you want.
Okay,
You
sure.
can just do mine
Mobiles
again.
are really
maybe.
developing too. No. So I'll start out. My my Twitter handle and on the internets is journalism. I am the director of mobile for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, which who's here has heard of the Broadcasting Board of Governors? This is, okay, you guys just like literally doubled as many people as in the past 2 years that I've worked there that know what we do, or at least what our name is. You want to talk a little bit about building products for the other 5 buildings we do. We build news products for these audiences. So Will Sullivan, hit me up at wsullivan if you want to talk more. We're always looking for partners, especially at State. We've done a lot of presentations and kind of information exchanges with you all, and we love you guys. So I'm at Journalism, and you can find all sorts of social fun at aboutme/Will Sullivan. I'm also pretty good at SEO, so I'm usually the highest rank for Will Sullivan, which is
That's very impressive.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I've worked very hard at that.
It's not easy.
So here's who we are. We are the Broadcasting Board of Governors, the brands of Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Marti Noticias, Radio Free Asia, and the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, which is El Hura and Radio Sawa. We're focused on emerging markets that don't have an internet. We've got journalists around the world, about 3,600 total, and about 1,000 journalists and producers based here in DC, where I am based at the Cohen Building across from the Capitol. This is going to be kind of like an Ignite on steroids, because I know you guys all probably want to run. So we are set up in countries, more than 60 languages. We operate more than 87 news language services. There's a little overlap because Voice of America, Radio Free Asia overlap in certain countries. Same thing for RFE and Voice of America. Total, actually that's 206. And we focus on countries that have more mobile phones than toothbrushes in the world, which is an awful, but it's kind of what we focus on. For our mobile strategy keys, and what I think applies directly to this panel, is we're always focusing on performance. We're always focusing on low bandwidth. We're trying to engage on multi-platform, both low bandwidth hardware, low bandwidth software. Our app supports back to like Android 2.3, which is I think about 5 years old by now, which is half of the age of the smartphone. We focused very heavily on multi-language, original content, again, 61 languages. We try and minimize the data costs on users as much as possible because in these emerging markets, to get access. And we embrace low tech, we embrace legacy platforms, and are often challenged by hostile governments and internet circumvention. So we build proxies and try and get around issues with China and Iran and all the fun places in the world. But there's no silver bullet for any of these. SMS is fantastic, and we do definitely use that as part of our suite of opportunities. This is kind of our funnel of opportunities that we engage in right now, and I'll show you some examples from each. Dedicated mobile websites and so we're doing kind of the M.dot thing. We're working on responsive, but as you can imagine, working in right to left, monster process. Doing it well in a responsive approach that's not going to overflow a user on a 2G phone with huge images. You got to work it really hard to make it work well. We build mobile applications, both niche and kind of an umbrella kind of general news application. We really try and fight against people that always come to us and are like, we need an app, we need an app, we need an app, we need an app, and try and leverage the hardware and native functionality and really justify why we have to build the app, because apps are very expensive, they're very difficult to maintain, but they can be very powerful. We use interactive voice response systems, which are kind of like movie phone when you call up and listen to news on them. We deployed them kind of specific cases, like we recently did one in Central African Republic when there was a big crisis there this past winter. We do affiliates and syndication. This is becoming a very large portion of our network. We do digital messaging, ebooks, PDF, SMS. I'm going to show you kind of examples of each of these. So here's kind of an example of a breakdown of our 3 websites: the desktop version, the mobile version, and then the ultra mobile version that strips out all images. Our applications, which have done very well, especially being recognized for, people say good enough for government work. This is good enough for commercial work. They've been, last year, declared finalists for the GSMA Awards as Best Mobile Publishing Platform, which I'm really proud of to have done that in a government agency. We just declared a MEFI finalist and the Appy Awards also. And here we kind of got a breakdown of sort of how we balance emerging market features with innovative modern technologies. We're trying to deliver an enterprise product that CNN or the BBC would deliver also, but to these emerging markets that are much tougher to get into. The killer app on mobile phones, though, frequently is the FM radio, and we are very blessed to operate a network of many broadcast operators, both on radio and TV in many of these markets. So as much as, digital, our broadcast partners, our broadcast operations really help us a lot, especially with flighting and launching these new digital products and promoting them. Like I mentioned before, we do interactive voice response systems. These are kind of very heavy to maintain and deploy, but they can be very effective, especially in low bandwidth communities. Affiliates and syndication are becoming a very large part of our, and if you go to BBG Direct, you can check out some of the content that you can get for free from us, put it on your website, put it, fly it out through your embassies. We just launched, so I definitely encourage you to check it out. We do digital publications kind of on spot events and special cases. There's kind of the high-end digital where we're doing some kind of experiments with iBooks, pubs, and then kind of the very low-end digital where we're doing in Cuba paper flash drives, passing around digital. Such a low bandwidth country, there's barely any cell coverage. We're doing a lot of experiments right now with digital messaging. WhatsApp is humongous around the world and a huge opportunity, I think. But very manual, labor intensive. And we're also doing work with SMS and targeted markets, actually using Frontline, some of them. But it's very costly, as we mentioned before. So holler at me if you want to talk later, and cede my rest of my time.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Will, for ceding the microphone. I wanted to just give a little overview of a couple of items about the State Department and how it works in terms of digital media and messaging. We have lots of different bureaus and work in Washington, such as the BBG, the Information Programs Division, what we call IIP, Public Affairs Bureau, which also handles the spokesperson's office, and all of them employ digital tools. We deploy these tools overseas differently, and I'm going to speak a little bit from the overseas perspective because I've spent the majority of my career there. And what we do overseas is we try to communicate with the intention to influence foreign publics in regards to our policies. And either to be favorably disposed to an issue, to work in partnership with us on an issue, perhaps change in some way that's favorable to our strategic interests or American values, whatever they may be. So this is one of the rationales for the programming that comes from the BBG. Digital media has allowed us to bypass the traditional media and to bypass traditional diplomatic activity, and to carry our messages to millions, sometimes even billions of people. Practitioners of public diplomacy like myself often debate how much and when to use digital tools, and with what audience. Whether providing information or content leads to influencing, empowering, or transforming our audiences or the people with whom we interact. We also wonder whether we are credible when we are on Twitter or Facebook or SMS or any other mobile technology. We continue to increase our use of all of these, and in Cairo, which was my last post, we started with 50,000 Facebook fans, now we have 850,000. We started with 7,000 Twitter followers, and in 3 years we increased it to over 70,000. We branched out into other kinds of technologies as well in order to deliver content and then to get feedback. But we angst whether we can fit these digital tools into a whole strategy of communications that includes traditional press activities, academic exchanges, speakers programs, one-on-one meetings. We have a huge amount of things that we deploy when we think of messaging, communicating, informing, and influencing. And we wonder how we can keep up the spontaneity digital or social media tool when we have to go a very carefully crafted, debated, scrutinized, cleared, and sometimes even then ultimately denied messages that we might want to put out. So my fellow panelists have highlighted a number of creative uses for digital media, and throughout the day you probably have come into contact with a lot more. I'd just like to raise a few points for us all to contemplate and maybe for you to take home and think about. First of all, digital mobile media is infrastructure dependent. Countries around the world vary widely in terms of penetration and control of digital media. Pew did a global study in 2013, and in general, the statistics show that internet with income levels, and that most of the users were under 35. Some countries and regions had such low penetration that even I was astounded. In 2013, Iraq was 8%, Afghanistan 6%, Liberia 4.3%, which may indicate one of the reasons we're having issues right now with Ebola communications. Smartphone ownership in many countries was very low. Pakistan 3%, Uganda 4%, Egypt 23%, which was the market that I worked in. Other markets are very high, but if you look at the list of names that I just mentioned, strategically important and critical places, and we have challenges with digital communications. And in my experience, literacy rates influence whether or not people are reading written messages. So polls that were done in Egypt, for example, show that the majority of people got their information from television, friends, and family. The question is, how do you communicate in that environment? And how do you communicate with publics about critically strategic interest? Second, interactive media is intended to be interactive. Everything we've talked about here is a give and take. When we send but we don't engage third-party actors or media, then have the opportunity to skew the interactions. Twitter is a good example of how credible names become the brokers of truth, and how the State Department and other U.S. government agencies on Twitter are hampered because when it comes to really important and critical policy issues, we put information out, but we don't always continue to engage. And if we never respond, then the user listen. And if they think we don't listen, they think we don't care. And that is the death knell for many a policy. Third, digital media is anonymous, and therefore entities can lie about who they are, mimic or pretend to be someone else, or actively cause mischief. When people use this over and over again, they can tend to be very skeptical and to distrust anonymous sources of information, and in societies where trust is really important, this can be a factor. Fourth, in societies where personal social interaction leads to trust, these anonymous communicators, even if representing a government, and here you get, again, I go back to the Ebola issues that we face in terms of people believing what they are receiving in terms of information. And in countries and governments regularly withhold information, or where rumors and conspiracies are credible, communications from the U.S. government often hold little credibility. Pew also launched a project on social media and the spiral of silence that noted that people were less willing to discuss controversial topics on social media than in person. Finally, digital media is labor-intensive. It's a 24/7 monitoring and maintenance project. And in Cairo, I ended up hiring an analyst. I had to hire a social media person. I had to hire a contractor to work at night. I had to have 24/7 coverage. So digital media is a tool, and the question is, do we want to use it to listen, analyze, inform, engage, or carry on a dialogue? And which one of these purposes will actually influence public opinion or lead to actions? How can we choose the most effective of these tools for the and the purpose? And how can we remain one step ahead of the technology curve in any given region of the world? Lots of questions, lots of food for thought, and this is something that we think about every day, and I'm looking forward to your answers or questions in regards to that. So thank you for coming.
All right, well, thanks to our panel. Your presentation at the end raised some of the real challenges of inclusion, broadly defined in terms of connectivity. A number of you touched on issues of low bandwidth. How do we program? How do we innovate for these kinds of challenges? So I see a number of kind of programs that you talked about that address some of the other issues around user content and making sure that content is in local languages is relevant. So addressing some of these real challenges of using mobiles for development in a very different context than what we see here. So I'd like to open it up for some questions and dialogue, both among the panelists. I don't know if anyone, I guess the three of you who went first, have any kind of thoughts on what Patricia was saying and some of the challenges, questions that she raised. And also, so I'll give you a moment to think about that and see if anyone has a question. If not, then I might come back to you and see if you have any thoughts on that. All right, we have a question in the back.
This is for Patricia. I remember listening to a BBC broadcast, a call-in program that people could tweet, and they were talking about health issues, all kinds of things. They were getting calls from parts of the world where they couldn't speak to their own government, or they couldn't speak frankly, and yet they were talking to the BBC on a broadcasted network. Wondering, aren't there really a lot of opportunities to engage in these conversations, even if people pretend to be someone else, to at least help people understand the benefits of being able to talk in some circumstances and then wonder why they can't in others, and at least help them understand the differences between the opportunity to engage and the environment they live in where they can't.
I agree with you entirely. Lots of opportunities, and Will tell you that many of the BBG programs have those call-in opportunities, and we've also run Google types of chats, and online digital chats, online Twitter chats, not online, but Twitter chats where people for a specific send in questions, and then we have live at that moment people who are crafting responses. So yes, this is an excellent tool, but you have to ask yourself, which audience is this for? What is the purpose? What is the message? And are we reaching the people that we want to reach with that? So in most of the places I've worked in the Middle East, it works very well with a lot of young audiences who are connected and who like to engage digitally or engage on Twitter, engage on Facebook, etc. The more traditional audience into a talk show on the radio or television, but the question is again, am I actually having the effect that I intend from that program, as opposed to just offering a platform for people to engage? And so that's always my litmus test. And it doesn't mean that I won't continue to do it, but it may not be exactly what I want to do at that point in time to get a particular effect.
I have a good example of this. Actually, we just finished working on, and I wish I had it on my tablet because it'd be a little bit bigger, but it's on my phone here. Radio Sawa is a network of Middle East broadcast stations focused on youth in the Middle East. We kind of created sort of a iHeartRadio for Arabic countries. We can't get FM transmitters in the country because the government control, but you can listen to the streams live through digital, and you can also submit into, this is the call, you can kind of answer, record it in. 3, 2, 1, it's counting down, and this is all in Arabic. I can't read Arabic, but basically we're recording our message in for the question of the day for the talk radio show, kind of voicing your opinion into the networks. It's got news and a bunch of other information. It's really quite awesome.
Cool.
But it's an example sort of a technology to get that broadcast issue that we have.
Interestingly, Radio Free Europe, used Frontline at one point. They were broadcasting I think it was in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but places where it was tougher for Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Liberty to have a physical presence, and so it was using text-in programs and then some attached to the cloud to that interaction. One of the things that I think is interesting and really that your question brings up is that in institutions like the State Department and in international development communities, I think that digital technologies are also forcing sort of a narrowing of what are we able to accomplish, and not trying to be all things to all people. One thing that really, so the Ebola example, for just as an example, one of the groups that has actually been surprisingly effective is the United Methodist Church, and I'm not surprised because of that. I'm surprised because they're an organization whose mandate is not in development wholly, and they've come in and been able to work through on-the-ground pastors and on-the-ground pre-existing social relationships. And so when their messages come in, they come with a different type of trust and a different relationship, and that relationship has made those messages in many ways more effective in messaging, even known or unknown to be coming from the US government. And so there are very interesting decisions to be made in the way that we design diplomacy programs about working from a national voice or a governmental voice, but also finding local champions with contextual relationships who are able to bring both their communities to the table and the table itself, right? So that the message and the dialogue is something that can be had in an open and honest way.
I totally agree with that, and I only wanted to add one other factor, which is adds to credibility in these markets is the use of dialect. And what's happened on SMS and Twitter and Facebook and various different digital platforms is that people use them informally. They no longer are speaking the formal language, so just LOL, laughing out loud. There's lots of equivalents for that in Arabic and in other dialects. And so we face challenges when we try to communicate on that level in order to engage as well. Are we more credible or less credible if we start going into dialect as opposed to a standard spoken or written language? And that adds another, and maybe an organization that's worked on the ground for a long period of time in a country is able to use that a lot more facilely or with a lot more facility than we can, and it adds to their credibility.
But it also raises an interesting point about kind of a limitation that you all have addressed in sort of different ways. This digital can only take us so far in some ways. It's also about that trust, that relationships that also exist that can both facilitate that kind of communication and also in some cases, I guess, hinder it, depending on how trustworthy the source is. And that was a point that was raised in the previous panel for those of you who were also here as well. So, questions?
Well, I think it's an interesting topic. We've listened to several groups talk about digital diplomacy or mobile communication, and I wonder, part of, you're talking about foreign policy issues, but we also had people from Peace Corps here and USAID who are on the ground. And I'm wondering, there are a lot of groups that are doing like sustainable development, sustainable agriculture, sustainable architecture, where they're usually first world groups trying to help the third world, and they have great websites, but a lot of the information could help the third world. And I'm wondering to what extent if these programs also were informative and contained information and discussions that people could use and other parts of the US government could help carry out there and implement, then in a sense, maybe through multiple levels there might be more trust in how we're helping them and what we're communicating.
Thoughts?
Trust is an interesting factor. I mean, one of the things that puzzled me when I was in Egypt, but also in other countries that I've been in, is why is it that we have so many American NGOs and businesses, and we've had such a long involvement in a country, and yet we have issues of negative public opinion, lack of awareness of what USAID does, and all these kinds of things. And so the question is, how do you build trust? How do you build credibility? And do you have to hold your digital communications use hostage while you ponder that question? And I think you have to look at it at various different levels and say, okay, you know, there's some things we just want to communicate and get out there. There's some things that we want to do that are built as a package or a strategy. You pick a initiative that is very, very popular in a particular place at a particular time that you can find great local partners for. And you build on that by partnering with people. You are working with them in partnership. That starts to spread. Knowledge of that starts to spread. You magnify that with the use of media. Then you open it up to dialogue. And then slowly, within certain communities, you can build some trust. But if you've got tens or hundreds of millions in a country, the question is, Do you want them all to trust you? You want some of them to trust you? Are there significant segments of it that you think are really important to go for? So it's a really complicated question. I agree with you that local, U.S. businesses and U.S. NGOs and U.S. academia have a great role to play and be some of our best brokers in terms of building trust.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask Will, Sean, and Nick. Clearly, you work a lot in other countries. So, how do you start developing those relationships, partnerships with other organizations? How do you kind of get past some of that? Nick, you also had something.
Well, maybe just to build off that, I think what we've seen is that people are really hungry for technical skills, and I think that's true of this country. There's no surprise that computer programming is taking the world by storm, and that people all over the world are starting to develop and build these skills. There's a hunger for them, and there's a movement, the massive open online course movement, to try and provide that skills training at scale, to kind of find another level of engagement that takes us deeper than radio programs and SMS messages. So we're excited about that. We're trying to capitalize on that. But I think at the same time, the demand is there, the hunger is there. These are people who are not used to learning in formal settings. And I think that gets really complicated quickly. I think that we need to be thinking and thoughtful about how to provide them with the right kinds of support. There's a new movement to provide mentorship with technical skills building, as opposed to just saying, let's do a course for 100,000 people and there we go, they're all trained. So I don't think there are any easy answers, and I think we're starting to get through the first wave of what we consider to be the massive open online course movement, and now we're starting to get deeper and trying to understand what's worked, what hasn't, and more people and build some better skills.
Yeah, I think education is a really great vehicle for that. Things, especially, maybe it's just kind of the situation at the BBG. We're separate from the State Department, and there's a bill that in Congress that is trying to basically make Voice of America become a voice piece for the State Department. And there is much anger about that because there's so many over 3,000 journalists around the world risking their lives that have been, jailed, beat up, murdered for the journalism that they're doing. They believe in journalism. They've been trained as journalists. I was trained as a journalist. I came here as a journalist. So journalism, it's a little more sticky to be retweeting every single thing the State Department does. But I think there's great potential for education. I think we're going to be working with the American English, our Learning English division potentially on some projects because I think education is just as long as you're not, making it ridiculous.
Yeah, I would just say that, from the software perspective, a lot simpler. And we tend to think of it in kind of two ways. It's about value and values. And a lot of what we find is that Frontline has a very long history of not pretending that it knows the answers. And what that's enabled us to do is put something that we think is valuable out and see what people do with it. And the coolest part about my job is that I am constantly learning from this enormous global user base of people doing things that I would never ever conceived of using our tool set, and designing for configurability, ensuring that you respect the role of the person who you're interacting with, and not shouting at them, right? Like imagine if the physical experience matched the digital experience, and kind of everything you walked by screamed. Or like Doritos asked you to be your friend in the grocery store. Like it would just be awkward, and you probably wouldn't trust Doritos, and you shouldn't trust Doritos. But that's a sort of for value. I think that a lot of it comes back to respecting the role and the autonomy, and recognizing that not every person wants every message, and not every message is valuable to every person. And that if you have to develop visible mechanisms of listening so that people know they're being heard in order for them to care about what you have to say. And that's true in interpersonal conversation, and there's no reason it shouldn't be true in digital conversation.
That's great.
Yep, there's a microphone coming.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm a graduate student from Georgetown, my core school of public policy. I'd like just to ask a more general question about internet and some technologies, including mobile. For some time, internet and these kind of technologies seem to have flatter effect. That means to say making the society more equal or something. But now I think more and more people are thinking that internet actually has made the society more unequal, at least in China, because as you've mentioned, internet is very infrastructure dependent, and it requires a lot of background information or education to make good advantage of this. For example, if I cannot, if I don't have electricity, I cannot use internet, or if I do not speak English, maybe much of the information I can get make no sense to me. So how do you think of this kind of effect, and how can we deal with it? Because of course we cannot ask the elites to slow down to wait for those less educated people. So how do you deal with that? Thank you.
That's, I think, probably my favorite question, and I'll
Yeah, that was
be
awesome.
really, really quick. No, but very seriously, that's an amazing question, and it's something that
Very good.
every time someone starts to design technology interventions, that is the most important thing, I think, to consider. Technology is unquestionably an accelerant, and the group have access to and are comfortable using that technology will be accelerated by it. And what that means is that the gaps between groups of people over time really grow. And institutionally, that's even doubly more important, right? If you can pay your taxes online and vote online and do all of the other things that you do in terms of civic services, life has just gotten a lot easier for you in a way that it doesn't get easier for the people who wait in line for hours to be seen, who maybe, run through inefficient runarounds. It's absolutely designing for the largest audience first. And I think that's so much of the reason that we talk about inclusion as a process. SMS is an inelegant technology, but the reason that we started there is because it is a two-way technology that reaches more people than any other two-way technology in the world. It's far from perfect, but it's a place. It's a place to start. And I think that, we have people who work with lots of large institutions to do that on the panel. So, but I do think that that is just an absolutely tremendous question, and should be a lot of the principles that we pull out of events like this one.
I'll just add that when we set out to figure out what learning platform to use to deliver our courses, we felt very strong. We should design a use case for the developing world, not repurpose something that's designed for higher education in the United States. And so we spent a lot of time and money and working with local context to build out that platform. And I think the other factor here is cost. I know there's a big movement called the Alliance for Affordable Internet that's basically saying, how do we get the cost of internet down to 5% of monthly income for people? Right now in a lot of countries, it's 100%. So that's a piece. I think Sean's very nicely articulated that there's also has to be a lot of thought put into what is the value beyond just, this is too expensive. What is the value of internet for people, and how do we not increase the digital divide? But certainly cost is such a barrier for so many people. We looked at a lot of maps today of where the fiber optic cables are in continents like Africa. We're making great strides. A lot of great parties are driving that forward. But if it's 100% of your monthly income to pay for internet, it's not even, so we can't even begin that conversation.
Yeah, the short answer is it's to combat that by offering as many products that will serve as many people as possible. We're working on an application right now that will launch probably next month that is basically it's a 3-button application for people that are, it helps people that are kind of not very tech savvy. It's 2 big buttons basically. It's a click to call application, so you can listen to our broadcasts through your application. And I think one thing that a lot of people kind of forget about in kind of the design standards of mobile and kind of emerging technology is we're jumping right now from sort of this humorphism design where everything kind of looked like the physical object in the world. The notepad looked like a yellow college ruled notepad in Apple, and now it's design. And that barrier where it kind of explained what the functionality was of this thing on the screen, going to disappear for all these people. And I think it's a really difficult challenge. I don't have a solution, but it's just something that I think a lot of people need to acknowledge that as we move to this new design paradigm. Don't forget about the people that have no idea what the interface is and how to do like that. It's just fascinating. But that's a great question to ask.
I think somebody has found a PhD dissertation study topic. The State Department and many other U.S. government departments and agencies recognize that there is a technology, and whether it's USAID or whether it's the Department of Commerce or the State Department, we have slowly but surely a lot of different kinds of programs that we're trying to put in place, working with the U.S. private sector to add a digital component to of things that we do, whether it's an English language teaching program that we then give computers and digital access to the students, or whether it's USAID working with a ministry of communications in a country to help build their infrastructure, or Microsoft or some other companies that have donated quite a lot of equipment. But it's always going to be a challenge, especially since certain parts of the world may catch up with one technology, and then other parts of the world or different economic segments may be then on to the third or fourth or the fifth new technology. And what does that do to societies? And what does it do to the world? I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, and that's precisely the office that I work in at USAID. One of our goals is to address that issue of inequality and to work at inclusion rather than magnify the divide. So I think it's time for one more question if there is one.
I saw it was 2-0. I'm sorry.
But if not, then I will, any last comments, panelists? Okay, well then that was a great question to end on. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and to our panelists for their insights and expertise. Thanks again.